All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got this story from Timcast.com. President Joe Biden tells Americans to have confidence in banking system as additional banks fail. Silicon Valley banks and signature banks were both taken over by the federal government amid collapsing share prices. I also want to point out that for some of the images we use on Timcast.com, they're AI generated. Just look at how horrifying. This is good. Like this picture of Bank Run has these people screaming, but it's like the Junji Ito of Bank Run AI generated images. It looks like these people are being hunted down by some demon that's stealing their soul as the banks collapse. But anyway, I thought that was funny. The federal government took control of Silicon Valley Bank, a top bank in the tech sector, on March 10th after its share price rapidly plummeted. New York regulators announced on March 12th that they have taken control of Signature Bank, known for real estate lending and serving clients tied to the cryptocurrency industry. Quote, "The bottom line is this. Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe," Biden said during a press conference at the White House on March 13th. "Let me also assure you we will not stop at this. We'll do whatever is needed." Oh, boy. I love how when East Palestine has this massive chemical spill, he didn't even show up. He didn't even mention it. Okay, he mentioned it. Don't get me wrong. But there's no bailouts. They don't care about the people who live there. But when millionaires and billionaires in Silicon Valley have their woke tech sector threatened, he comes out on TV and says, at 9 a.m. of all times, Joe Biden waking up at 9 a.m. saying, we're going to take care of this. Nothing to worry about. Here's what I think. I hate to go on a show with as many viewers as this and be like, the end is nigh or something like that. But Joe Biden has to come out and say this. He has to, because if he doesn't, there's a run on the banks. Yep. And if people go on TV and say anything other than everything is A-okay, then there's a run on the banks. So that's the default position of every personality in media, whether it's true or not, I don't know, is to come out and pretend like everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense because your bank's insured for $250,000 per account. So 99% of Americans, banks can fail. FDIC, they're insured. You have nothing to lose. So it's amazing to me that Biden is panicking and doing this stuff for the ultra rich. You have more than $250,000. So for Silicon Valley Bank, he's just helping out big tech companies and rich investors in big tech companies, because normal people who had deposits at Silicon Valley Bank have nothing to worry about. Most people don't have $250,000 sitting in a checking or a bank account. They had nothing to lose.
Yep. And so what they're going to be doing is apparently the FDIC will cover deposits above $250K. And apparently, I guess BuzzFeed had all their money in Silicon Valley Bank. Well, now I'm really encouraging no bailouts. Bye-bye.
They shouldn't.
It doesn't benefit us. It hurts the normal people because that means federal government's bailing it out. That means more debt. That means more inflation that everyone, including poor people, will pay. And this is just a move to help rich people who have more than $250,000 in big companies and banks. It makes no sense to be doing this.
Well, there were, like, I was listening to a space today. Most of the day I was listening to spaces and just trying to wrap my head around what's going on. And from what I can gather is the biggest worry is contagion to other banks. So we've got two of the biggest bank failures in American history happening over the course of the past weekend. I am of the opinion that if the government's, because the government's going to bail everyone out, or bail the banks out, because the government has basically taken responsibility for any failures in the banking industry. They've bailed out everybody every time that there's been any kind of
the rich elites.
No, well,
big banks.
Banks.
I mean, to be fair, they printed a lot of money. And whenever the government prints money and it goes to the people, it ends up with the big banks and the big corporations anyways, because everyone gets that money and they spend it. It's not like people go and they sit on it when they get, if you get $500 from the government, when the government, was passing out cash, people didn't sit on that. And it wasn't enough money to change anyone's life or that they make it, that they're going to invest with it anyways. So that money just ends up in the big corporations' hands anyways, because people spend it. So they're just going to continue to print money because that's what they have to do. So when they get together again, when the Fed gets together again, instead of doing 50 basis points, it's likely they're going to do 25. It's possible they're going to do 0, and then they'll see what happens I don't know what's going to happen between now and then, obviously, but they're going to take the break off the raising of rates because they can't have the rate. I can't keep interest rates keep raising interest rates the way that they are with this kind of monetary situation in the U.S.
Or they want to provoke loans to the banks, basically. So Bannon asked me on Friday, Steve Bannon, why it's a Ponzi scheme, this economic system that we're in. And I gave him like a half answer. I said that it's because we're borrowing money from our banks, our institutions, our government is borrowing money from the Federal Reserve and then promising to pay them back with interest. The only way to get that interest is to borrow more money from them at interest to pay back the interest, which now we owe interest on the new borrow. So we have to borrow more to pay back the interest on the interest. And the real Ponzi is when what happens is that money goes to the banks. Then the banks loan out to the common American for mortgages, and then they have to pay the interest. They push the interest down to the small guy.
Sort of.
And so this whole system is banked off these 40-year interest payments by American people, constantly paying more than they borrowed to fund this Federal Reserve usury.
Well, I mean, it's sort of to fund that, but remember, like when you are getting a mortgage, you're getting a house too. So
if you pay the debt, it's technically owned by the bank until you pay them back.
Well, yeah, but you get to live in the house. It's not a one-sided operation, is what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying, that it's frustrating that you have to pay more than what you're borrowing, but that's why the banks are in business. So that way, like, they'll lend you the money, you pay them more than they actually lended you. That's the business model.
And let's talk about it seriously. A lot of people, they don't like international war and things like that. A lot of people, they don't like the petrodollar. They don't like imperialism. They don't like big bank bailouts. But I believe, for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, these are the evil things that these evil people do that does have a positive effect for a lot of people in this country. That is, when the U.S. military is setting up military bases in foreign countries and pointing guns at people and saying, use the U.S. dollar or else, it creates demand for our currency, and then we don't have to do as much work. And if the petrodollar collapses, then we're going to have to go back to chopping wood and raising chickens on our own and actually producing things in our country, something most Americans aren't prepared for and don't want to do.
Most Americans that are young now, they're just demanding free.
That's why
demanding free stuff.
Ken
Klippenstein today was tweeting about forgiving student loans. Like today, because they're talking about bailing out banks. The banks that, if you bail out a bank, you're bailing out a bank because people had money that they put into the bank. So that's completely and totally isolated from like the situation with student loans where people didn't have money, they borrowed money, they got an education ostensibly, and then they're asking to be forgiven for that borrowing money. Well, you're the one, you're getting the forgiveness for the education or for the borrowing money, and you get to walk away with the education. You're getting free shit.
It's the interest. It's the excessive compounding interest that is the problem. They used to call it usury.
That's fine, but that's not the same thing as forgiving the loan in totality.
Correct.
That's different.
Yeah. I'll hardly ever advocate for just deleting people's loans. I think that's kind of dumb. But like the idea, the profiting mechanism of loaning money, I get it. It was a risk. If I loan you $100, there's a risk you'll never show up again. So I've got to at least like give me 110 back. That way, if I loan out 10 times and one of those guys walks away, at least I made my money back. But it's excessive. Compounding interest, debt upon debt is like, it's almost incalculable by the common American mind.
It is. The issue here is how our whole economy is one big Ponzi scheme from the get-go that is unsustainable. And going back to 2008, we can clearly see there's holes in the system. They put a Band-Aid over those holes, but the water is spraying through. The ship is sinking. And now we're seeing... It's like that cartoon where the holes are popping up in the hole and the cartoon character is putting his fingers and then his toes in his eye or whatever. You're not going to stop it. But here's what I want to say. Bailouts, okay. If you want to sit in your lounge chair and watch sports and order nachos and drink beer and not have to worry about anything, you want the bailouts. You want it all. If you are an entitled Gen Z or Gen Zer or millennial who wants to go to college for gender studies, you want the bailouts. And this is why you are seeing the default liberal and leftist be like, we need to make sure we take care of this. Because then they prop up the system that allows them to do nothing. I kind of think we need to go back to a little bit of hard work. I'm not saying everybody should go work on ranches where they tend to chickens and goats and stuff like that, but maybe just a little bit. Because right now we got a bunch of, like that viral video of the Gen Zer being like, why do I have to work to live?
That is burned into my brain. And
Make them work. Just let the banks fail. Then they can go be like, I'm hungry. Be like, well, start picking food yourself. Grow your own food and chickens or whatever.
Biden says that none of these losses will be borne by the taxpayer from this bailout. He tweeted that 7 hours ago for the record. He said we'll pay for it from the fees the banks pay into the deposit insurance fund. Now, I understand wanting to bail out $250,000 of uninsured. A lot of the 95% of the accounts in this Silicon Valley Bank thing were not insured. So all those $250,000 accounts are gone. But they're decided to bail them out. I understand bailing out the small investor or companies up to $250,000.
I don't think that's correct. No, again, if you had less than $250,000 in that bank or any bank, you have no risk. You're covered.
If you're FDIC insured,
they all are.
No.
Yes, they are.
FDR insured.
They all are.
The only ones who are getting bailed out are the ones who are beyond $250,000. So there were big tech companies that this bank invested in, and people invested money in these companies, and this bank did too. So we're bailing out a bank because their huge, big payoffs didn't work for them and they failed. And it's back just like we did in 2008. We invested in tons of taxpayers' money to bail out Wall Street firms who had huge investments in derivatives, making billions of dollars of profits for the people working in those Wall Street banks of zero value to American citizens. But, Goldman Sachs, the treasurer, Secretary of Treasury at that time, was a former Goldman Sachs CEO. And Federal Reserve people, Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street firms, and the government and the Federal Reserve, full of people from Wall Street, bailed out Wall Street at the expense of the rest of the citizens, the too big to fail argument. And that's what's going on here the same way. Only in this case, you're bailing out banks that did bad investments in tech companies, and tech companies that make big donations to people from both political parties. That's who's getting bailed out. This is not to help, low-income people with $250,000, bank money in there. This is just people at the bank making big investments that are getting bailed out from this, not normal citizens.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.